In a small American town, an unemployed teenager's life changes in a single afternoon. What seemed like a simple act of kindness, helping an old woman carry her groceries, slowly draws him into a world of secrets, hidden power, and decisions that could shatter everything he knows. The woman isn't who she appears to be, and with every step he takes, the truth edges closer, and far more dangerous than he could imagine. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today, and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. It was a cold Thursday afternoon in Brooksville, the kind of small town where people noticed if you didn't mow your lawn for a week. The streets were quiet except for the occasional rumble of an old pickup truck or the bark of a dog from behind a chain-link fence. Jake Miller, 19 and jobless for the past 4 months, was trudging down Maple Avenue with his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his faded hoodie. His sneakers were worn out, soles so thin he could feel the cracks in the pavement through them. He'd been walking all day, going from one store to another, asking for any kind of work, stocking shelves, sweeping floors, anything, but every answer was the same: "Sorry, we're not hiring right now." He was about to head back home when he spotted her. The woman was standing at the curb outside the Brooksville market, wrestling with 2 brown paper bags that looked ready to rip. Her gray hair was neatly tied in a bun, her long navy coat buttoned up to her neck. She had an air about her, straight back, composed, but her hands trembled as she shifted the weight of the bags. One bag sagged dangerously, the corner giving way under the weight of canned goods. Jake hesitated for half a second, then crossed the street. "Ma'am, do you need a hand with the O's?" he asked. She looked up, and for a moment her sharp, piercing blue eyes locked onto his. They were the kind of eyes that seemed to see straight through you, the kind that made you stand up straighter without realizing it. Then, just as quickly, her expression softened. "Well, I suppose I could use a little help," she said, her voice warm but steady. "These old arms aren't what they used to be." Jake took the heavier bag from her before it could tear completely, feeling the strain in his own arms. "Where to?" "Just a few blocks down," she replied, nodding toward a side street. "If you don't mind the walk." They started down the road together. At first, their conversation was light: the weather, how quiet the town had been lately. But Jake noticed little things: the way she glanced over her shoulder now and then, how her steps quickened slightly whenever a car passed. And though she spoke with the grace of someone well-educated, there was a guardedness in her tone, as if she was measuring each word before letting it out. "What's your name?" she asked after a few minutes. Jake Miller." "Well, Jake Miller, I'm Mrs. Hartley," she said, shifting the bag in her hand. "And I appreciate your kindness." When they turned onto Cedar Lane, Jake noticed something else. The houses here were bigger, older, with wraparound porches and wide lawns. Mrs. Hartley's home was a 2-story Victorian with pale green siding and white trim, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in an old postcard. The front porch had a swing, gently swaying in the cold breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something floral. She set her bag down on the kitchen counter, motioning for Jake to do the same. "You've been out walking all day?" she asked, her eyes scanning him as though trying to read his whole story in one glance. "Yeah, looking for work," Jake admitted. "Not much luck lately." For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression, not pity exactly, but recognition, like she'd been in his shoes once. Then it was gone. "Sit for a moment," she said, pulling out a chair at the small kitchen table. "I'll make you some tea." Jake thought about refusing, but the truth was he hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the warmth of the kitchen felt good after hours outside. As she filled the kettle, he glanced around. The kitchen was tidy, but he noticed stacks of newspapers neatly piled on a side counter, each one folded to hide the headline. The date on the top one was from almost 2 weeks ago. He also noticed a large framed photo hanging by the doorway: Mrs. Hartley, younger but still with the same piercing eyes, standing at a podium. Behind her was a large American flag. She wore a navy blazer and had her hand raised as if she were taking an oath. Before he could ask about it, she returned with a steaming mug and set it in front of him. "Chamomile," she said, "good for calming the nerves." As he took a sip, he felt her eyes on him again, studying him with quiet intensity. "You're not from one of the old families around here, are you?" she asked. "No," Jake said slowly. "We moved here about a year ago. My mom works over at the diner." Mrs. Hartley nodded as if filing the information away. "And your father?" Jake hesitated, fingers tightening around the mug. "Not around." She didn't press further. Instead, she walked over to one of the newspaper stacks, pulling a folded section from somewhere in the middle. Without a word, she slid it across the table to him. The headline read, "Former Senator Elizabeth Hartley steps away from public life after unexplained incident in D.C." Jake blinked, looking from the paper to her. She was already watching him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "People forget quickly in a small town," she said quietly. "Sometimes that's a blessing. Sometimes it isn't." There was a sudden knock at the front door, sharp, deliberate, 3 times in quick succession. Mrs. Hartley's gaze flicked toward it, her jaw tightening. She didn't move to answer. Instead, she walked to the window beside the door, pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside, then let it drop. She turned back to Jake. "Finish your tea," she said, her voice low now, almost urgent. "When we leave, walk beside me. And whatever you do, don't speak until we're past the corner." Jake's stomach tightened. "Leave? Who's at the door?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed her coat and the keys from a small dish by the counter. Outside, the street was quiet again, but Jake noticed a black sedan idling half a block down. As they walked, Mrs. Hartley's grip on his arm was firm, her posture unshaken, but he could feel the tension in the way she moved. When they turned the corner, she finally spoke. "You helped me with my groceries, Jake. Now I'm going to help you. But first, you have to trust me." Jake glanced back. The black sedan was still there, but now the driver's side door was slowly opening. Jake's heart pounded as he followed Mrs. Hartley down Cedar Lane. The cold air stung his face, and his breath came out in quick, uneven puffs. He couldn't stop glancing over his shoulder, half expecting the driver of that black sedan to step out and call after them. Mrs. Hartley kept her pace steady, her grip on his arm firm but not painful. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, as though she knew exactly where she was going and didn't want to waste a second. When they reached the next block, she finally released his arm and spoke in a low voice. "Don't look back. Just keep walking like you belong here." Jake nodded, but curiosity gnawed at him. "Who was that? Why were they at your door?" "They weren't at the door," she said calmly. "They were watching the house. There's a difference." They crossed the street, and Jake noticed her scanning the parked cars. Her movements were subtle, but there was nothing casual about them. This was the kind of checking people did when they expected trouble. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Someplace they won't follow," she replied. "At least not right away." Her tone left no room for argument, so Jake kept quiet as they turned into a narrow alley between 2 brick buildings. The pavement was cracked, and the smell of damp garbage hung in the air. Halfway down, Mrs. Hartley stopped beside a green metal door. She pulled a small key from her coat pocket, unlocked it, and motioned for Jake to go in. Inside was a dimly lit corridor with old, peeling wallpaper and the faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere nearby. It looked like the back entrance to an old apartment building. She shut the door behind them, slid the bolt across, and led him up a narrow staircase. On the second floor, she opened another door, revealing a small but neat apartment. There was a couch, a coffee table with a stack of books, and a window overlooking the alley they had just walked through. She locked the door behind them and drew the curtains. Jake stood in the middle of the room, trying to make sense of everything. "You have 2 places?" Mrs. Hartley sat on the couch and motioned for him to do the same. "Call a precaution. Sometimes it's better to have a quiet place where no one expects you to be." He sat, still uneasy. "Why would anyone be watching you? You're just an old lady." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Jake, nothing about my life has been just anything for a very long time." She leaned back, her eyes fixed on him. "You said you've been looking for work?" "Yeah," Jake said cautiously. "Why?" "Because I may have something for you," she replied. "But if you take it, you'll need to listen carefully, follow instructions exactly, and keep your mouth shut to everyone, even your own family." Jake frowned. "What kind of job are we talking about?" "The kind where people in black sedans take an interest in you," she said plainly. "And the kind where trust is the most valuable thing you can offer." Before he could respond, there was a faint sound from outside, the distant crunch of tires on gravel. Mrs. Hartley stood immediately and moved to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peek out. Jake followed her gaze and saw headlights passing slowly down the alley, then stopping near the green door they had come through. A man stepped out of the car, dressed in a dark suit despite the cold. He looked around, then tapped something into his phone before getting back in. "They're thorough," she murmured, letting the curtain fall. "That means we'll have to move sooner than I thought." Jake stood there, tore between wanting to walk out and never see her again and wanted to know what was really going on. "You could just tell me what this is about." Mrs. Hartley looked at him for a long moment. "If I told you everything right now, you'd either run or you'd be in more danger than you can handle. So for now, you'll do as I say, and you'll decide later if you want to walk away." She disappeared into the small kitchen and returned with a manila envelope. She handed it to him. It was heavier than he expected. "What's in here?" he asked. "Something that needs to be delivered, by hand, to a person I trust. They live across town near the river, and you'll take it there tomorrow morning." Jake opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. "Don't open it. Don't ask questions about what's inside. Just make the delivery. Then come back here." The firmness in her voice told him she wasn't making a suggestion. He stared at the envelope, then back at her. "And if I don't—" She didn't blink. "Then you'll find out exactly how persistent the people in that black sedan can be." The word sent a shiver down his spine. He wanted to believe she was exaggerating, but something in her steady gaze told him she wasn't. Later that night, Mrs. Hartley insisted he sleep on the couch in the apartment instead of going home. "It's safer for tonight," she said simply. Jake lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the envelope resting on the coffee table. He could hear faint city noises outside, the hum of a distant train, the occasional bark of a dog. Every time a car passed in the alley, he tensed. Sleep came in short bursts, broken by strange dreams he couldn't remember clearly. When morning light finally crept through the curtains, Mrs. Hartley was already dressed and waiting by the door. "You remember where you're going?" she asked. "Near the river," Jake said, rubbing his eyes. She handed him a folded piece of paper with an address on it. "Take the back streets, avoid the main roads. And if anyone stops you, you tell them you're on your way to visit your uncle. Nothing more." Jake nodded, tucking the paper into his pocket and picking up the envelope. His gut churned as he stepped outside. The air was crisp, the streets quiet. For the first few blocks, everything felt normal, just another morning in Brooksville. But halfway to the river, he spotted it again, the black sedan. It was parked at the far end of the street, angled so it faced him. The engine was running. Jake's pulse quickened. He turned down a side street, walking faster now, the envelope clutched tightly under his arm. The sound of tires crunching on asphalt followed. Jake's legs moved faster than he realized, the slap of his sneakers on the pavement echoing in the quiet street. The cold air burned his lungs, but he didn't dare slow down. He tightened his grip on the envelope until the edges bent in his palm. He could hear the low hum of the sedan's engine behind him, steady and unhurried, like the driver was in no rush to catch him. Just watching, waiting. He cut across a small park, the crunch of frost underfoot muffling his steps. An old swing set creaked in the wind. He glanced over his shoulder. The sedan had stopped at the edge of the park, but the driver's door was open. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out. Jake didn't wait to see more. He bolted toward the far side of the park, hopping over a low chain-link fence and landing hard in someone's backyard. A dog barked inside the house, loud and sharp, but he kept moving. The backyard ended at a narrow street lined with old row houses. He ducked between two of them, the brick walls pressing in on either side, and emerged into an alley where garbage bins stood in uneven rows. He crouched behind one, his heart hammering. The sound of footsteps reached him, slow, deliberate. They weren't rushing. Whoever it was knew they had him cornered eventually. Jake's eyes darted around, searching for another way out. At the far end of the alley, a rusty fire escape clung to the side of a building. He sprinted toward it, leapt onto the lowest rung, and climbed fast, his hands stinging from the cold metal. Halfway up, he risked a glance back. The man in the dark coat had entered the alley. He stopped at the base of the fire escape, looking up. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't even trying to catch up, just watching, like a cat watching a trapped mouse. Jake kept climbing until he reached the rooftop. The city stretched out around him, low buildings, telephone poles, and the faint glint of the river in the distance. He ran across the roof, jumping the narrow gap to the next building. His foot slipped on the landing, but he caught himself and kept moving. The wind was sharp up here, tugging at his hoodie. His breath came in clouds as he crossed 3 more rooftops before finding another fire escape and climbing down the other side. When his feet hit the ground, he checked the street. No sedan, no man in the coat, but he knew they weren't gone, just out of sight. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket and checked the address Mrs. Hartley had given him. It was still 6 blocks away, near the riverfront. If he stuck to the back streets, maybe he could get there without being spotted. He moved quickly, cutting through alleys and side yards, avoiding the main roads. Every so often, he thought he caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow slipping around a corner, a glint of sunlight off glass. By the time he reached the riverfront, his legs ached and his fingers were numb. The address led him to a narrow, 2-story building with peeling blue paint, and a small sign over the door that read Clark's Repairs. He pushed the door open, and a small bell jingled overhead. Inside, the air smelled of oil and sawdust. A man in his 60s sat behind the counter, wearing a flannel shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from a worn ledger. "You Jake?" the man asked, his voice gravelly. Jake hesitated. "Yeah, Mrs. Hartley sent me." The man's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of her name. He stood, motioned for Jake to follow, and led him into a small back room. Once they were out of sight from the street, Jake set the envelope on the table. "She said to give this to you," Jake said. The man didn't open it right away. Instead, he studied Jake for a moment, as if deciding whether he could be trusted. Then he slid the envelope into a drawer and locked it. "Did anyone follow you?" the man asked. Jake swallowed. "I think so. Black sedan. Tall guy in a coat." The man's jaw tightened. He walked over the back door, peered outside, and then shut it quickly. "You shouldn't stay here. Go back the way you came. And if you see them again, don't let them box you in." Jake frowned. "What's in the envelope?" The man shook his head. "Not your problem. Kid, just stay out of trouble." Jake left the shop, but his gut told him staying out of trouble wasn't going to be that simple. He kept his head down as he retraced his route, sticking to narrow streets and weaving between buildings. But halfway back to the apartment, his stomach dropped. The black sedan was parked at the end of the block. This time, there were two men outside it, the tall one from before, and another shorter man with a shaved head. Jake didn't wait. He darted into the nearest building, an old laundromat with flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of detergent thick in the air. A woman folding clothes glanced at him, but said nothing. He slipped out the back door into another alley and ran until his lungs burned. His mind raced. Who were these people? Why were they after Mrs. Hartley and now him? By the time he reached the green door to the apartment, his hands were shaking. He unlocked it and stepped inside. Mrs. Hartley was sitting at the table, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up as he closed the door. "You made it back," she said evenly. "They were there," Jake said, breathless. "At the shop, and on the way back. I don't know how they keep finding me." Mrs. Hartley took a slow sip of her tea before answering. "Because they're not looking for you, Jake. They're looking for me. You just happened to be carrying something they wanted." Jake's skin prickled. What was in that envelope? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. "That's something you'll learn soon enough. But for now, we're going to have to leave Brooksville." Jake stared at her, still catching his breath. "Leave? As in, right now?" Mrs. Hartley stood, pushing her chair back with a quiet scrape against the floor. "As in within the next hour." "But where are we even going?" "Someplace they won't think to look for a while," she said, moving toward a small cabinet in the corner. She unlocked it with a tiny key from her necklace and pulled out a battered leather duffel bag. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a pair of sturdy boots, and a metal tin. Jake watched as she began packing quickly, each movement precise. She took out the tin, opened it, and pulled free a stack of $20 bills wrapped in a rubber band. She handed it to him. "Put this in your pocket. Don't count it now." Jake did as told, his fingers brushing the worn edges of the bills. "You've had this bag ready. For how long?" "Long enough," she said without looking up. Within minutes, she had the duffel zipped and slung over her shoulder. She glanced toward the window, then turned back to Jake. "We'll take the train. The station's less than a mile away, but we can't use the main road. They'll be watching it." Jake grabbed his hoodie from the back of the chair. "And if they're watching the station too?" Her eyes locked on his. "Then we'll find another way out. But standing still is the fastest way to get caught." They slipped out the green door into the narrow alley. The air had that damp, heavy feeling of an overcast afternoon. Mrs. Hartley led the way, keeping to the shadows and side streets. She seemed to know exactly which turns to take, as if she'd walked this escape route many times before. Halfway to the station, Jake spotted movement at the far end of the block, the black sedan turning slowly onto the street. "They're here," Jake whispered. Mrs. Hartley didn't break stride. "Stay close." They cut through the back lot of a hardware store, stepping over broken pallets and stacks of old paint cans. Jake's pulse was thudding in his ears. When they reached the opposite side, he glanced back. The sedan had stopped at the curb, and the tall man had stepped out, scanning the area. Mrs. Hartley led him into another alley that emptied into a narrow lane lined with brick warehouses. "Almost there," she murmured. They reached the station just as a train's whistle echoed in the distance. The building was small, just 2 platforms and a ticket counter. There were only a handful of people inside, most of them looking half asleep. Mrs. Hartley bought 2 tickets in cash, then handed Jake his. "Platform B. We keep our heads down until the train's moving." Jake followed her out to the platform. The wind off the tracks was sharp, rattling the metal benches. He spotted a security camera mounted above the ticket window and instinctively turned his face away. A few minutes later, the train pulled in with a loud squeal of brakes. They boarded quickly, choosing seats near the middle of the car. Mrs. Hartley sat by the window, Jake beside her. As the train began to roll forward, Jake felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. But then he saw them. Through the glass, on the far side of the platform, the tall man and his shorter partner were moving quickly toward the train. One of them spoke into a phone, the other scanning the windows. "They're here," Jake hissed. Mrs. Hartley's eyes flicked toward them, then back to the aisle. "Stay calm. If they board, we get off at the next stop and lose them in the crowd." The men reached the edge of the platform just as the train picked up speed. One of them broke into a jog, but it was too late. The platform slid away behind them. Jake let out a shaky breath. That was close. Mrs. Hartley didn't relax. "They'll be waiting at the next station. We have to assume they know where we're headed." They rode in silence for several minutes, the steady rhythm of the train filling the gap between them. Jake kept glancing at the door at the far end of the car, half expecting it to slide open and reveal the men. When the train slowed for the next stop, Mrs. Hartley stood. "Let's go." They stepped off into a busier station this time, filled with commuters and families. The noise was disorienting after the quiet streets of Brooksville. Mrs. Hartley grabbed Jake's arm and steered him toward the far exit. Outside, a line of taxis waited at the curb. She waved one over, and they climbed in. Where to? The driver asked. Riverside Motel, she said without hesitation. The driver pulled away, merging into the flow of traffic. Jake pressed his forehead to the glass, scanning the street behind them. For a few blocks, there was nothing unusual, just cars, buses, and pedestrians. Then he saw it. The black sedan, 2 lanes over, moving with the traffic. They're behind us again, Jake said quietly. Mrs. Hartley didn't look back. I see them. The driver glanced in the rear-view mirror. You two in some kind of trouble? Just drive, she said firmly. The driver took a sudden left turn onto a narrower street, lined with diners and pawn shops. I know a back way to the motel, he said. They'll have to circle the block to follow. Jake held his breath as they zigzagged through side streets, the sedan disappearing from view. 10 minutes later, they pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Riverside Motel, a faded 2-story building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. Inside, the smell of cigarette smoke clung to the walls. Mrs. Hartley paid for a room in cash, and they took the stairs to the 2nd floor. Once inside, she locked the door and set the duffel on the bed. Jake sank into the chair by the small table, running a hand through his hair. I don't get it. We're miles from Brooksville. How do they keep finding us? Mrs. Hartley was quiet for a moment, then unzipped the duffel. Because they're not following the town, Jake. They're following me, and they've been doing it for years. She pulled out a small black case, clicked it open, and showed him what was inside. A sleek, silver cell phone with no brand logo. No buttons except a single power switch. Jake frowned. What's that? Her voice was low. Something that can ruin powerful people if it ends up in the wrong hands. Jake leaned forward, eyes fixed on the small silver phone in Mrs. Hartley's hands. It's just a phone, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Hartley shook her head. It's not just a phone. It's encrypted, military grade. There's information on here that certain people will do anything to keep hidden. Jake's throat felt dry. What kind of information? Her gaze met his, steady and sharp. The kind that can take down people in high offices. People who think they're untouchable. Jake sat back, trying to process her words. So, the black sedan? Those guys? They're not police, if that's what you're thinking, she said. They work for someone who doesn't want the truth coming out, and they think I'm the only one standing in the way. He glanced toward the curtained motel window. If it's that dangerous, why keep it? Why not just get rid of it? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Because once you have proof, throwing away doesn't make the problem disappear. It just makes you powerless. Before Jake could reply, there was a faint knock on the door. 3 taps. Quiet but deliberate. Mrs. Hartley's expression hardened. She put the phone back in its case and slipped it into the duffel. Stay behind me, she whispered. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against it. The knock came again, same rhythm, same patience. She didn't open it. Instead, she crossed the phone on the nightstand and picked it up. Yes, she said into the receiver. There was a pause. Then her posture stiffened. She hung up and turned to Jake. We need to leave. Now. Jake's pulse jumped. What is it? They know we're here. She grabbed the duffel and pushed it into his arms. We're going out the back. Stay close and keep moving. They slipped out into the narrow hallway, passing a row of faded doors. At the far end was a metal exit door with peeling red paint. Mrs. Hartley shoved it open, and cold night air rushed in. The back lot was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. A dumpster stood near the fence, and beyond that, a row of overgrown bushes. They headed for the bushes, keeping low. Halfway there, Jake heard it, the low growl of an engine. A black sedan rolled slowly into the lot from the main road. They're here, Jake hissed. Mrs. Hartley grabbed his sleeve and yanked him toward the fence. Over. Jake tossed the duffel over first, then scrambled up, his shoes slipping on the cold metal. He landed hard on the other side, grabbed the bag, and turned just in time to see Mrs. Hartley climb over with surprising speed for someone her age. They cut through the bushes into the alley behind the motel. The ground was uneven, and Jake nearly tripped over a broken pallet. Mrs. Hartley kept moving, weaving between trash cans and abandoned crates. At the end of the alley, they burst onto a side street lit by the orange glow of a single street lamp. A city bus rumbled past, brakes squealing. Without hesitating, Mrs. Hartley waved it down. The driver looked at them suspiciously as they climbed aboard, but didn't ask questions. They took seats near the back, the duffel between them. Jake risked a glance out the window. 2 blocks away, the sedan was turning onto the same street, headlights sweeping across the pavement. They're still coming, Jake murmured. Mrs. Hartley's eyes stayed on the road ahead. They will, but right now, they don't know where this bus is going. The bus rumbled on, passing dark storefronts and shuttered diners. The hum of the engine and the sway of the seats did little to calm Jake's nerves. He kept expecting the sedan to appear in the next lane. After 20 minutes, Mrs. Hartley pulled the cord for the next stop. They stepped off onto a quiet intersection with a single corner store still lit. "Where now?" Jake asked. She motioned toward a narrow street, leading downhill. "There's a safe place about 6 blocks from here." They walked quickly, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the brick buildings. Every few minutes, Mrs. Hartley glanced behind them. Jake followed her lead, scanning for any sign of the sedan. By the time they reached the last block, Jake's legs ached. Mrs. Hartley stopped in front of a plain brown door wedged between a laundromat and a bakery. She knocked twice, waited, then knocked once more. A bolt slid back, and the door opened just enough for a man's face to appear. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes. Without a word, he let them in. Inside, the space was dim and smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Old filing cabinets lined the walls, and a single desk lamp cast a warm circle of light in the center of the room. The man locked the door behind them. "You shouldn't have come here, Liz," he said, his tone both worried and irritated. "We didn't have much choice," Mrs. Hartley replied. She set the duffel on the desk and opened it, revealing the black case. "We need to get this somewhere safe." The man's eyes narrowed. "You still have it?" "Yes," she said simply. "And they know I do." He glanced at Jake. "Who's the kid?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Just someone who helped carry her groceries." The man gave a humorless chuckle. "Guess you picked the wrong groceries." Mrs. Hartley ignored the comment. "We can't stay here long. Do you still have contact in the city?" The man nodded slowly. "1 or 2 who haven't sold out yet. But if you're moving this thing, you need to do it fast." He went to a small safe in the corner, spun the dial, and pulled out a folded map. Spreading it on the desk, he pointed to a spot in the heart of the city. "There's a place here, secure, private. If you can get it there, you might have a chance." Mrs. Hartley studied the map, then folded it and tucked it into her coat. "We leave before sunrise." Jake frowned. "That's in a few hours." "That's the point," she said. "They'll expect us to move during the day." The man poured coffee into 3 chip mugs, and for the first time since leaving Brooksville, Jake felt the slightest warmth of safety. But it didn't last. From somewhere outside came the distant purr of an engine. Slow, searching. Mrs. Hartley set her cup down and met Jake's eyes. "They found us again." The low purr of the engine outside grew louder, slow and steady, like whoever was driving wanted to make their presence known. Mrs. Hartley stood, motioning for Jake to stay quiet. She moved to the small window, pulled the curtain back just enough to peek through, then let it fall. "There across the street," she said calmly, though her jaw was tight. The older man set his coffee down. "You two need to go now. I'll stall them if I can." Mrs. Hartley shook her head. "If they see you here, you'll be on their list too." He gave a grim smile. "I've been on lists before." Jake glanced toward the duffel on the desk. "So we're just going to run again?" Mrs. Hartley turned to him. "Running is how we've stayed alive this long. But this time, we're not just running. We're heading straight for the city." The man crossed a side door, pulling out a set of keys. "There's an old delivery van in the garage. It's not much, but it's better than leaving on foot." He led them into a narrow garage that smelled of oil and dust. An old white van sat in the corner. The paint faded, and the back doors marked with a ghost of the company logo that had long since peeled away. Mrs. Hartley climbed into the passenger seat, Jake sliding in behind the wheel. She handed him the folded map from her coat pocket. "You drive. Follow my directions. Don't stick to the main roads." Jake's hands felt clammy as he started the engine. It rattled to life with a groan. The man stepped back, giving him a short nod. "Good luck, Liz." "And kid," he looked directly at Jake. "Keep your eyes open." Jake pulled out of the garage, turning onto the narrow street. Mrs. Hartley kept glancing at the side mirrors. 2 blocks later, the black sedan appeared behind them, headlights cutting through the dark. "They're on us already," Jake said. "Don't panic," Mrs. Hartley replied. "Take the next right, then another right after that. We'll see if they follow." Jake did as she said. The sedan turned both times, closing the gap. "They're definitely following," he muttered. "Then we make it harder for them." She pointed to a street ahead that sloped downhill. "Turn there and floor it." Jake swung the van into the downhill street, the tires squealing slightly. The van rattled over potholes, the engine protesting at the sudden speed. In the rear-view mirror, the sedan kept pace. Mrs. Hartley scanned the road ahead. "There's a covered parking garage 2 blocks down. Pull in and kill the lights." Jake spotted the garage and turned sharply into it. The van's headlights swept over rows of empty spaces. He drove up one ramp, then pulled into a corner and shut off the engine. They sat in the dark, the only sound Jake's breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. Moments later, the sedan rolled past the entrance outside, then stopped. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Do you think they saw us?" Mrs. Hartley didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the sliver of the street visible from their spot. The sedan idled for a few seconds, then pulled away. She waited a full minute before speaking. "Okay, Out the back exit of the garage. There's a service road that will take us toward the highway. They started the van again, creeping through the garage until they found the narrow exit ramp. It led them onto a cracked service road lined with chain link fences. Once we hit the highway, it's a straight shot to the city, Mrs. Hartley said. If we can make it without them catching up. Jake merged onto the empty highway, pushing the van as fast as it would go. The night stretched out ahead, a ribbon of asphalt lit by their headlights. For a while, there was no sign of the sedan. The tension in Jake's shoulders eased slightly, but Mrs. Hartley stayed rigid in her seat, scanning the darkness behind them. An hour later, the faint glow of the city appeared on the horizon. Jake felt a flicker of relief, but it died when he saw headlights appear in the rearview mirror. "They're back," he said. The sedan was closing fast. Mrs. Hartley's voice was firm. "They're going to try to box us in before we reach the city limits. Take the next exit. It leads into the industrial district. Lots of turns, lots of places to lose them." Jake took the exit ramp, the van's tires squealing again. The road ahead wound between dark warehouses and rows of parked semi-trailers. The sedan stayed on them, weaving through the same turns. Mrs. Hartley spotted a narrow alley between two warehouses. "There!" Jake swung the van into the alley, the walls pressing close on either side. They emerged onto another street, only to find the sedan coming at them from the opposite direction. Jake slammed the brakes. The van skidded to a stop. The sedan stopped too, blocking the street. Mrs. Hartley's voice was low. "Reverse. Now." Jake threw it into reverse and backed into the alley. The sedan's tires screeched as it spun to follow. Mrs. Hartley pointed to a side lot where an old semi-trailer sat detached from its cab. Behind that, Jake pulled in and cut the engine again. They waited in the shadows, barely breathing. The sedan roared past, not slowing. After a long moment, Mrs. Hartley exhaled. "We've bought ourselves a few minutes. Let's use them." They drove out the opposite side of the lot, heading for a side road that curved back toward the city. As the skyline grew closer, Mrs. Hartley finally spoke. "Once we're in, we find a safe location. Then this phone gets into the right hands." Jake glanced at her, and if it doesn't, she looked straight ahead. "Then we don't make it out." The first streetlights of the city washed over the van, painting the windshield in gold and shadow. The skyline loomed ahead, tall glass towers, neon signs, and a faint hum of traffic. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. "Feels like we made it," he said, though the words came out more as a question. Mrs. Hartley didn't look convinced. "We're not safe yet. Big cities make it easier to disappear, but they also make it easier for someone to trap you." Jake took an off-ramp that funneled them onto a 4-lane street. Pedestrians walked along the sidewalks, some carrying groceries, others leaning against street corners with glowing phones in their hands. The normalcy of it all almost made him forget the hours of pursuit. Then he saw it, the black sedan. It was 2 lanes over, moving in parallel. "They're here," Jake muttered. Mrs. Hartley didn't even turn her head. "Stay calm. Keep driving. Don't make it obvious you've seen them." Jake forced himself to stare straight ahead, though he could see the sedan edging forward in his peripheral vision. At the next light, the sedan slid in front of them, slowing down just enough to be annoying, but not enough to block them outright. Mrs. Hartley's voice was sharp. "Turn right. Now." Jake jerked the wheel, pulling them into a narrower street lined with old brick apartment buildings. The sedan hesitated for half a second, then followed. Mrs. Hartley reached into her coat and pulled out a small black notebook. She flipped it open, scanning a page covered in neat handwriting. "We're heading for a contact. Name's Carson. Owns a print shop near the river. If we can get there, he'll know how to hide us." Jake pushed the van harder, weaving through traffic. The streets narrowed further, the sidewalks cracked and littered with trash. He made another sharp turn and nearly slammed into a delivery truck, blocking the road. He hit the brakes, the van jolting to a stop. Behind them, the sedan accelerated. Mrs. Hartley didn't hesitate. "Out! Now!" They both jumped out of the van. Mrs. Hartley slammed the door, and they ran toward a metal staircase attached to the side of a building. Jake's heart pounded as they climbed 2 steps at a time. Below, the sedan screeched to a stop. 2 men in dark jackets got out, scanning the street. Jake and Mrs. Hartley ducked onto the 3rd-floor landing and slipped into a hallway that smelled of old paint and cooking oil. Mrs. Hartley moved fast, knocking on a door without pausing to listen. An old woman in a faded sweater opened it, frowning. "Liz." "No time to explain," Mrs. Hartley said. "We need your back exit." The woman stepped aside, pointing toward a narrow kitchen. "Through there, down the stairs." Jake followed Mrs. Hartley through the kitchen and down a cramped stairwell that opened into another alley. They ran until the alley spilled onto a wider street, filled with taxis and buses. "Keep moving," Mrs. Hartley said, her breath quick but steady. "Blend in. Look normal." Jake tried, but every time a black car passed, his stomach knotted. After 10 tense minutes, they reached a block where a glowing sign read, Riverside Print and Copy. Inside, the shop smelled of ink and paper. A tall man with rolled-up sleeves stood behind the counter, feeding paper into a large printer. He looked up, frowning at the sight of Mrs. Hartley. "Liz, you're supposed to be gone. Plans changed," she said. "We need a place to stay, and we need it now." The man, Carson, locked the front door and flipped the sign to close. He led them through a back room stacked with boxes of paper and into a small office. "You've got people after you," Carson said. "I saw the car out front." Mrs. Hartley sat in the chair opposite his desk. "They've been on us since the outskirts. We shook them a few times, but they keep finding us." Carson drummed his fingers on the desk. "Means they've got eyes in more than one place. And if they're the kind I think they are, hiding won't be enough." Jake looked between them. "What kind are we talking about?" Carson's gaze was steady. "The kind that doesn't stop until they've got what they want, or until you're gone." Mrs. Hartley opened the duffel on her lap, just enough for Carson to see the secure phone inside. His expression hardened. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That explains it." Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching echoed outside. Carson moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. "They found you again," he said. "And this time they got backup." Mrs. Hartley stood. "Back door." Carson nodded, leading them into a narrow hallway. "I've got a friend at the ferry terminal. If you can get across the river, you'll have more options and fewer eyes." They slipped out the back and into the cool night air. The alley behind the shop led straight toward the river, its surface shimmering under the streetlights. Jake could hear shouting back on the main street. They ran, weaving between parked cars and cutting through another alley. Ahead, the ferry terminal came into view, a squat building with a few passengers milling near the entrance. Carson's contact, a stocky man in a ferry uniform, waved them forward. "Boat leaves in 2 minutes. Get on, don't look back." Jake and Mrs. Hartley boarded quickly, blending in with the small group of passengers. As the ferry pulled away from the dock, Jake finally let out a breath. The city lights began to shrink behind them. Mrs. Hartley stood at the rail, her face unreadable. Jake joined her. "Think we lost him this time?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the dark water between them and the city. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "We didn't lose them. We just bought ourselves time." The ferry's engine rumbled under Jake's feet, the steady thump of propellers cutting through the night. The air smelled of diesel and river water. City lights shimmered behind them, growing smaller with each minute. Jake leaned against the railing, trying to shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Mrs. Hartley stayed quiet, her coat collar turned up against the wind. Every now and then she glanced toward the ferry's entrance, as if expecting someone to burst through the door. The crossing took only 15 minutes, but to Jake it felt like an hour. When they docked on the far shore, the passengers shuffled toward the exit ramp. Carson's contact, the ferry worker, met them at the dock. "This way," he said quickly, his voice low. "Got a car waiting." Jake followed, his sneakers crunching on the gravel path. The man led them to a dark green SUV parked in the shadows of an old warehouse. "You'll take the road north," the man said, handing Mrs. Hartley a small folded map. "There's a motel about 20 miles up. The owner's solid, no questions asked." Mrs. Hartley nodded. "Thank you." Jake slid into the driver's seat, started the SUV, and eased him onto the empty road that ran along the river. For the first few miles, the only sound was the hum of the tires and the occasional call of a night bird in the trees. Then headlights appeared behind them. At first, Jake thought it was just another car, but the lights stayed the same distance no matter how much he sped up or slowed down. Mrs. Hartley's voice was calm, but firm. "We're being tailed again." Jake's grip tightened on the wheel. "I thought the river would slow them down." "It did," she said, "but it didn't stop them." The road curved sharply ahead, cutting through a dense patch of trees. Jake took the bend fast, hoping to break line of sight. But when the road straightened again, the headlights were still there, closer now. Mrs. Hartley reached into the glove box and pulled out a small flashlight. "Turn off the headlights when I say so." "What?" "That's dangerous." "Trust me." Jake's heart hammered as the road dipped toward a bridge. The river shimmered faintly to their right. "Now!" Jake flicked off the headlights. The SUV plunged into darkness, the tires roaring against the asphalt. Mrs. Hartley leaned out her window, pointing the flashlight backward. She clicked it on and off in a quick pattern, the bright burst of light cutting through the night. The headlights behind them swerved suddenly, braking hard. "What was that?" Jake asked. "A signal," she said. "One they didn't expect. Threw them off just enough." Jake flicked the headlights back on, pushing the SUV faster. The bridge passed under them, and soon the road opened into a stretch of farmland. They reached the motel a little past midnight. It was a squat, L-shaped building with a flickering neon sign that read, "Vacancy." The office smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning supplies. A heavy-set man with a thick mustache sat behind the counter, watching a small TV. Mrs. Hartley spoke quietly. We need a room, just for the night. The man glanced at them, then at the parking lot outside. His eyes narrowed slightly. Room 6, around the side. Jake carried their small bags into the room. It was simple: 2 beds, a small table, and curtains that barely covered the window. Mrs. Hartley locked the door and drew the curtains tight. "Get some rest," she said. "We leave before sunrise." Jake tried, but every sound outside, a car passing, a door shutting, kept him wide awake. Around 3 a.m., he finally drifted off. He woke to the sound of someone tapping on the window. He sat up fast, his heart racing. The tapping came again, slow, deliberate. Mrs. Hartley was already awake, her hand raised to keep him quiet. She moved to the window and peered through a small gap in the curtain. Her jaw tightened. "They found us." Jake's stomach dropped. "How?" "They're good," she said. "Too good." There was no time to think. Mrs. Hartley grabbed the duffel, and they slipped out the bathroom window into the cool night air. They crept along the side of the building, staying low, a black SUV idled near their room, 2 men standing beside it, scanning the parking lot. Jake followed Mrs. Hartley through the shadows until they reached the tree line behind the motel. The damp grass soaked through his shoes as they pushed deeper into the woods. Branches snapped underfoot, and Jake kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see flashlights chasing them. After nearly half an hour, they emerged onto a gravel service road. Mrs. Hartley stopped, catching her breath. "We can't keep running like this," Jake said. "We need to know who they are and why they want you." Mrs. Hartley's eyes locked on his. "And if I tell you, you might not want to help me anymore." Jake hesitated. "Try me?" She glanced down the empty road, then back at him. "They're not just after me. They're after something I have, something that can ruin them. People in power. People who think they're untouchable." Jake stared at her. "And you think they'll stop if they get it?" Her voice was flat. "They won't stop. Ever." A faint rumble of an engine echoed in the distance. Mrs. Hartley pulled him toward the trees again. "Come on. If we can reach the train tracks before sunrise, we'll have another chance to disappear." The gravel crunched under their feet as they moved quickly, the sound of the engine growing louder behind them. The engine noise behind them grew into a steady, menacing hum. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears as he and Mrs. Hartley pushed through the trees toward the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off the train tracks. The air was cold, the kind that stung when you breathed too hard. Every twig snap felt like a signal flare giving away their position. Mrs. Hartley moved fast despite the duffel weighing down her shoulder. "We're close," she whispered. Jake spotted the steel tracks through the thinning trees just as a beam of light swept past them. A flashlight. Voices followed. "They're in here." Mrs. Hartley grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him into a crouch. They ducked behind a fallen tree, the bark rough against Jake's back. Boots crunched on dry leaves just a few meters away. A man's voice, sharp and low. "Fan out. Don't lose them." Mrs. Hartley's eyes flicked to the tracks, maybe 30 yards away. "When I move, you follow. No hesitation," she murmured. Jake swallowed hard and nodded. "Now." They bolted, feet pounding the damp earth. Shouts erupted behind them. A flashlight beam swept over Jake's shoulder, and someone cursed. The tracks loomed ahead. Just as they reached them, a distant horn wailed. A freight train's headlights cut through the darkness from the right, still far, but closing fast. Mrs. Hartley ran along the tracks toward a small service platform. "We can jump on one of the rear cars." Jake's chest burned as they ran, the rhythmic thud of the train wheels growing louder. Behind them, footsteps pounded, gaining ground. The train roared past, a blur of steel and noise. Mrs. Hartley pointed to a ladder on the side of a slow-moving cargo car near the end of the train. "Go!" Jake grabbed the cold metal rungs and hauled himself up, heart hammering. Mrs. Hartley followed, her boots slipping for a second before she steadied herself. They climbed onto the narrow platform between 2 cars, the wind whipping their faces. Below, the men in black coats reached the tracks, but the train had already carried Jake and Mrs. Hartley out of reach. For a while, all they could hear was the rumble of wheels and the hiss of the wind. Jake leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "We can't keep doing this forever." Mrs. Hartley unzipped the duffel and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were photographs, printed documents, and a small flash drive. She handed them to Jake. "This is why they're after me. Proof of bribes, money laundering, people they've silenced. Years' worth." Jake stared at the evidence. "Why give it to me?" "Because if they get me, someone has to get this to the press. You're faster. You can disappear better than I can." Jake hesitated, feeling the weight of the choice. "And what about you?" Her expression was calm, almost resigned. "I'll make sure they keep chasing me long enough for you to get away." Before Jake could argue, the train slowed as it approached a small rural crossing. Mrs. Hartley glanced toward the road. "You jump off here. Head east. There's a bus station in the next town." Jake's stomach twisted. "I'm not leaving you." "You are," she said firmly. Or all of this means nothing. The train clattered over the crossing. Mrs. Hartley gripped Jake's shoulder, her eyes steady. Go. Now. Jake jumped. His legs buckled when he hit the gravel, but he kept running until the train's sound faded. He ducked into the tree line, breathing hard, clutching an envelope and flash drive. 2 hours later, the eastern sky began to pale with the first light of dawn. Jake reached the bus station, a squat brick building with a handful of early travelers inside. He bought a ticket to the city and found a seat in the back. His hands were still trembling as he slid the flash drive into his sock for safekeeping. As the bus rumbled onto the highway, Jake kept glancing out the window, half expecting the black SUV to appear again, but it didn't. 3 days later, headlines exploded across every major news site. Massive political corruption ring exposed, leaked evidence shakes state government. Photographs of seized bank accounts, secret offshore transactions, and shady business deals filled the articles. Arrest warrants had been issued for several high-profile figures. Jake read every line twice, but there was no mention of Mrs. Hartley. No photo, no confirmation if she was alive. He closed the laptop slowly. In his pocket was a folded note he'd found slipped under his motel door the morning after the leak. You did well. Keep moving. M.H. Jake leaned back in the chair, a strange mix of relief and uncertainty washing over him. She was alive for now, and maybe, somewhere out there, she was already planning her next move. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also an other to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.